All right, let's dive into one of the greatest special ops missions of the ancient world. Seriously, we're talking about a story packed with spies, betrayal, and a crazy plan to steal the very soul of a city. This is the divine heist of the Trojan Palladium.
So, for 9 long years, the Greeks were just stuck outside the walls of Troy. Think about that. They had the greatest warriors alive, but they were up against an impossible problem. How do you destroy a city that is literally, and I mean literally, protected by the gods? The answer wasn't about breaking down walls. It was about stealing its divine shield.
And that shield was the Palladium. As you can see, it's a xoanon, a sacred, ancient wooden statue of Pallas Athena. Now, this wasn't just some piece of art. In the ancient world, a xoanon was seen as a direct, almost living link to a god. The Trojans believed this one had fallen straight from the heavens. So, as long as it was safe inside their citadel, their city was absolutely invincible. It was their ultimate security guarantee.
So, okay, let's really get into what made this divine shield so powerful. What exactly were the Greeks up against here?
Well, the origin story is everything. The myth goes that Athena herself created it out of grief for her friend Pallas. Then, Zeus himself casts it down from Olympus, which is why it was called Diomedes, a sky-fallen object. The fact that it landed exactly where King Ilus was founding Troy? Yeah, that was no accident. It was a direct, physical link between the city and the heavens. This really captures the whole situation, doesn't it? The Greeks could throw everything they had at Troy's massive walls that were supposedly built by gods, by the way, but it was all useless. The city's true defense, the real source of its strength, wasn't stone and mortar. It was this small, sacred piece of wood, hidden deep inside.
So, you see the problem. The Greeks needed intel. They needed a secret, a weakness they could exploit. And that brings us to the turning point of the entire war.
The key, it turns out, came from inside Troy itself. Not from some brilliant Greek strategist, but from a Trojan prince and seer named Helenus, who happened to be the son of King Priam. He held the secrets to his own city's destruction.
So how did the Greeks even get to him? Well, it all started with a family feud. After Paris died, Helenus and his brother Deiphobus both wanted to marry Helen. Deiphobus won, and a very unhappy Helenus just abandoned Troy and went off to nearby Mount Ida. This was the opening Odysseus was waiting for. He ambushed and captured the seer, and just like that, secured the most valuable intelligence asset of the entire war.
And under interrogation, Helenus laid it all out. It wasn't just one thing. It was a prophetic checklist, a whole series of sacred and strategic tasks the Greeks had to complete. You could almost call it a kind of theological engineering. They had to bring Achilles' son, Neoptolemus, to the fight. They needed the divine bow of Heracles from Philoctetes. They even needed the bones of their ancestor Pelops. But the absolute linchpin, the one thing without which all else would fail, was stealing the Palladium.
Okay, so the mission is clear. Now the question is, how? And this is where the story splits into 2 very different versions. Was this a masterpiece of heroic cunning, or was it just an inside job?
The myths give us 2 totally different paths here. On one hand, you've got this story of heroic Medes, that cunning intelligence. This version stars Odysseus, who literally mutilates himself, dresses like a beggar, and slips into the city all alone. But then there's a darker story, one that suggests simple treason. In that version, a Trojan counselor named Antenor, maybe with help from the priestess Theano, just hands the statue over. It's the difference between daring spycraft and a complete internal collapse.
The more famous version, the one from the epic poem The Little Iliad, really focuses on Odysseus' solo mission. And what's fascinating here is Helen's role. She recognizes him, but instead of sounding the alarm, she actually helps him. She tells him where the Palladium is, basically becoming a collaborator in the city's downfall. It just goes to show you how fractured Troy had become from the inside out.
But the mission isn't over. Getting the prize is one thing. Getting it back to camp is something else entirely. And the return journey, this is where the partnership between our heroes completely falls apart and gives birth to a famous ancient proverb.
This one surviving line from the Little Iliad just sets the scene perfectly. It was the middle of the night and the bright moon lay on them. It sounds so peaceful, but it's totally cinematic and tense. That moonlight, which should be providing some clarity, is about to expose a really dark betrayal.
So here's the setup. Diomedes is the one physically carrying the Palladium. He's walking in front. But Odysseus, who's walking behind him, gets overcome with this desire for all the glory. He wants all the kilos, that undying fame that heroes lived and died for, and he just can't stand the idea of sharing credit for this mission.
And what happens next is just pure drama. Odysseus draws his sword to kill his partner in the back. But that very same moonlight from the poem betrays him. Diomedes sees a glint off the blade, or maybe its shadow on the ground, and he spins around, disarms Odysseus, and ties his hands. But instead of killing him, because, he's still needed to win the war, Diomedes forces him to walk back to camp, hitting his back with the flat of his sword just to keep him moving.
This is a perfect example of how one little moment in a myth can just echo through an entire culture. The act of Diomedes forcing Odysseus forward at sword point gave birth to a Greek proverb, Diomedeos ananke, or Diomedean Necessity, and it came to mean any action that you are absolutely forced to take, something you do under total compulsion.
Now, the fall of Troy wasn't the end of the Palladium story. Oh no! In fact, it was really just the beginning. Its legacy reveals this powerful idea of a portable kingdom.
And here is the core concept of its legacy. The Palladium wasn't just tied to Troy's physical location. It was portable sovereignty, a transferable guarantee of divine favor. Whoever possessed this statue could claim the power and protection that came with it. It was the soul of a city, and that soul could be moved.
And because of this power, of course, everyone wanted it. After the war, Diomedes supposedly took it to his home city of Argos. But then another story claimed the king of Athens captured it. Later, Sparta claims to have stolen it from Argos. The relic becomes this mythical hot potato. But the most famous claim of all comes from the Trojans' greatest survivor, Aeneas. His version? The Greeks stole a fake. He carried the real Palladium out of the burning city on a journey that would eventually lead him to Italy.
And in Rome, this idea of portable sovereignty became official. The Palladium became the most sacred of the Pignora Imperii, the pledges of rule. These were sacred objects, kept safe in the Temple of Vesta, that were believed to guarantee the power and the endurance of the Roman Empire itself. The luck of Troy had been successfully transferred, and now it was the luck of Rome.
And all of this brings us to a final, kind of provocative thought. The story of the Palladium is about a physical object believed to hold the soul of a nation. It really makes you wonder, if a country's ultimate guarantee of security can be stolen and moved, what's our Palladium today? Is it a document? A piece of technology? Or is it just an idea? What's the one thing whose loss would mean the end of everything?